Thank you for the reminder, Lori. Oh my gosh, I always that's one thing I can really be dependent upon is to forget to hit record. So thank you so much for that, and thank you, Tina, for praying us in. Okay, well, is it okay with you folks if I share screen here real quick? I don't necessarily intend to let me see. I want to share screen. Please, can I share screen? Okay. Where is my, there it is. Okay. Looks like a lot of you folks have this up already. So I don't necessarily intend to have a slideshow every time. I don't necessarily want this to kind of have an academic feel to it, but I just I thought again that some context might be good for this. And when I was doing some research, I found some interesting stuff that I thought might be helpful to have a little slideshow for us. So let's see. This is again oftentimes helpful from when I teach, just to kind of give folks a quick sense of what's in the slideshow. I want to just really go over some super basic things about the Synoptic Gospels. A little very super quick thing about the basics of the Gospel of Mark. Then we'll look at the translations that Lori found for us. And then this talk about this sandwich, which is super interesting. We'll find out what that means later. And some discussion of intertextuality. So there are three synoptic gospels: Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And we traditionally, when we talk about the gospels, oh, here's Helen.
Dottie just arrived.
Excellent, great.
Yes.
Welcome, Helen and Dottie.
Thank you.
If you want video, it's probably down the bottom left of your screen. You might, if you're on a phone, you might just touch the screen and.
I will. Okay, here.
But it's not required. So Helen and Dottie, I was just kind of giving some really basic context for the discussion of the passage today. So the synoptic, there are four gospels, as you know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And of those four, there are three that are known as the synoptic gospels: Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And the reason I give them in that order, generally speaking, when we talk about the gospels, we say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? Because that's the order that it shows up in the New Testament. And up until the 19th century, it was more or less assumed that Matthew was the first of the gospels. But then after that, some scholars kind of came along and made some pretty compelling arguments to suggest that Mark was probably the first of the gospels. And that the other two synoptic gospels, Matthew and Luke, were likely to have known about Mark and to have had Mark as a source when they were working on putting together their gospels. And then there's also another possibility that has come from a lot of this scholarship, which suggests that there's a probable unknown source that has never been found, which has been named, which scholars have called Q, which comes from this another German word that I don't know how to pronounce because I just don't know how to pronounce German. But it looks like French would be like Quelle or something like that. But in any case, the German word for source begins with the letter Q, and so hence they talk about this probable third source being they call it Q, and the assumption is that, or the scholarship seems to suggest that Mark and Q were the earliest of the Gospels, and that Matthew and Luke, the other two synoptics, were had a knowledge of or had access to Mark and Q when they were putting together the Gospels. And we need to also be aware that, as I think I discussed in the last Bible study last week, is that, you know, the whole notion of authorship in in antiquity was very different than it is today. They had no concern, or in fact, they had no concern for intellectual property, and in fact, they had the opposite concern. They really kind of wanted to hide themselves behind the tradition, and so so kind of our attempt to find authorship is oftentimes frustrated by that that kind of cultural imperative that they had to kind of hide themselves, hide authorship behind the tradition. So again, so Mark is, so these are just super basic things about the Gospel of Mark. Mark is likely to have been among, Mark and Q were likely to be the first of the synoptic Gospels. This is just a little scan that I put in from this really kind of crucially important piece of scholarship called the Introduction to the New Testament by Raymond Brown. It's pretty much generally considered to be the kind of the Bible about the Bible kind of thing. This I don't know that we necessarily need to go over it right now so much. I just added it in here for your edification if you want to look at it later. Basically, it just gives some real basics about the Gospel of Mark, and one of them is that you know that the dating is the likely dating of the Gospel of Mark is around 60 AD, and that you know, this is kind of, so this tells us that the Gospel of Mark, even at the earliest of the Gospels, came along, you know, probably a couple generations after, or at least, you know, maybe one generation after the life of Christ. And there's some question about whether Mark was actually an actual witness to Christ's ministry or not. So we have some basic information about the Gospel of Mark here. One thing about Mark that I just want to mention is that he's kind of like in some ways the Gospel is kind of like the kind of the I don't know, not the crib notes, but the kind of the he doesn't go into a lot of detail. Mark doesn't when he writes. He writes very very straightforward and unembellished prose. So it's like, especially if you compare it to Matthew and Luke especially, Luke really tells a story, and really, you know, that's where we get all the birth narratives and all that stuff from Luke, and all the parables. Luke is filled with parables. Mark has very few parables. Mark is just really a very straightforward text, and especially like if you look at the post-resurrection stories in Mark, they're like, it's literally like 3 sentences, I think. It's, you know, Mark doesn't go into a lot of detail. So what we get when we read Mark is a very, very kind of concise and straightforward telling of the story of Jesus. Okay, so here are the 4 versions of this particular text that we've been wanted to talk about today, that Lori found for us, and I wonder, do you have any observations at all, Lori, about how these 4 versions compare?
I guess the only observation that I had is basically some say that he won't ever eat fruit again. That was his curse, and others were forever and ever, you know, and it was a little bit stronger words, you know, the hereafter forever, you know. And but other than that, I thought that they were pretty similar.
Yeah, I had the same impression when I looked at the different versions, that they seemed quite similar. This will not always be the case. There are sometimes when we look at different versions, when we'll see that there are some really there can often be some very distinct differences that lead to very, very different interpretations. But these ones, I agree with you, Lori. They seem to be mostly pretty similar. But I like what the thing that you point out, right? That sometimes it's just like, oh, you know, sometimes the curse just seems to be like, you know, a passing thing. Another thing, and in other interpretations, it seems to suggest that you know, it's kind of a forever thing. But otherwise, most of these seem to be pretty similar. I don't know if anybody else wants to make any observations about the because we did distribute distribute these different versions earlier, so I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to look at them and to kind of come to any sense of any of the differences.
I wonder if there's a difference between the message. The last sentence of the message says that his disciples overheard him.
Yeah.
And the others say that his disciples heard him say it.
Right.
One, yeah, seems kind of sneaky in the message.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice observation, Mary Lou. It's a very nuanced, it's a very subtle difference, right? But it's really,
Right.
but it does make a difference in interpretation.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'd like, Stoddy, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to ask Lori why she picked this passage in the Bible. I don't think I've ever read it, ever seen it, ever heard it preached on.
Which one?
It's
The one we're talking today.
the one we're talking about today.
Oh, you mean this scripture passage?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
why?
well, it wasn't Lori who picked it. Who was it?
Deb.
It was Deb.
It was
Yeah.
me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, when Vicky asked for verses that puzzled us, this was one that was like, it's one that I always, and if I had remembered the stuff that I had been taught, I might not have been so puzzled by it. But as a kid, I remember thinking, how come he's in such a bad mood? So, I mean, that's, you know, that was something that the first time I heard it, I was a kid, and I, you know, thought it was such a strange thing. And I have over the years learned more about Mark and even read a whole about how Mark was written and completely forgot the whole sandwich thing. So, like, so wait a minute, now I get it.
Yeah.
But it was interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had sent this one along.
Okay, yeah, you're that's giving us a nice segue to the sandwich, which is really kind of the key here.
Yeah.
And it turns this moment where like Jesus is kind of an annoyed person and having a bad day into this kind of interesting biblical trick that happens. I don't know if trick is the right word. Technique that is used. So yeah, Dottie, that's the answer to Dottie. When we began the Bible study this time, we asked everyone to just to send biblical passages that they've always thought were, you know, puzzling or something like that, and or that they just wanted more information about. And so we're looking at those passages as the weeks
It's
go.
the strange thing. It's not the season for figs.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So why would he be upset?
Yeah.
Yes, precisely. This is that's precisely what's at
He
stake here.
did. He lived in the country.
Well, but not about a fig tree. He didn't understand that it was only leaves. Why would you condemn the fruit? Because the fruit hasn't been there.
That's interesting because that's one of the things I found. One of the rabbit holes I went down, I learned about fig trees.
Oh, really?
Yes, and one of the things I learned about fig trees is that while there isn't this might not have been the big season for them, that there were when there were leaves on a tree, on the fig trees in Palestine, that meant there was either very ripe fruit or the beginnings of fruit. There were like these little nubs on the tree that appeared when the leaves did that might not have been as tasty as a fig, but they were edible and people often stopped to eat them. And so that when you saw a tree with lots of leaves on it, that meant there were figs or at least something to eat. So that whole thing about Mark saying it wasn't the season for them was, to me, is odd, because once I did a little bit of research about fig trees, they're very rarely do they not have fruit on them in some form or another. So I thought that was interesting. And then,
Very interesting, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and you know, I'm not sure. From my perspective, like I would think that Jesus would have known that that it was not the season for figs. Personally, like that would just be my inclination to think that, like, in that day and age, people would be more aware of what's in season and what is not in season, because you know, because they were more dependent on things being in season in order to eat them, right? Like that was like they didn't have refrigerated train to bring in oranges from Florida, right? Like so they had to know that things were either in season or not in season.
But this illustrates that Jesus was not concerned with details like that.
Maybe.
He was conducting his ministry all the time, and I think that his head was into his work, not into eating and how things happen. That's what I would chalk it up to.
Okay.
But I do think he had a bad day, though.
He's not a kid. He's 30 years old, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh.
I mean, he's lived there all his life. He knows about fig trees.
Oh,
I
looks like
just
there's
think this
trouble
is
brewing on
shocking.
Cole
No,
Road over there.
Listen, people have lived with apple trees all their life and they don't know a thing about them.
Yep.
And they don't know a lot of agriculture, a lot of the things they eat. Like, oh my gosh, carrots come out of the ground, they're grown in dirt, they're not on top. I mean, I've heard it all through the years. And
Maybe
people,
mushrooms.
it is not on their radar screen.
Yeah.
All they know is they want to eat. And when they want to eat, they want to eat. They don't care where it comes from or how it gets there, whether it's ripe or not, until they take a bite.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
And again, even though the thing that surprised me was that even though it might not have had ripe, mature fruit on it, he probably would have expected to have found something edible on it because of the habit of these trees in Palestine that always had at least edible nubs, even if they weren't tasty,
Mhm.
once the leaves appeared. So, but
Judith, you wanted to say something?
Well, I might be the party pooper. I'm reading from the 5th gospel, the Jesus Seminar.
Yeah,
And in that, I don't know if you know what that is, but they write the gospel and
Can't hear
we
you.
lost your we
Can
lost.
hear you.
No, cannot hear you.
Can't hear you, Judith.
She's gone. I think she might have lost internet like I did.
in
Oh,
black
no. Last week, that's what I
and in
struggled with.
black.
She's in and out.
Oh, internet, terrible.
Wind is come.
She doesn't know it.
Yeah.
What happened to Q? Is Q included in Mark or is it not in the Bible?
I'm sorry, I just lost my internet, so I missed your comment, Helen.
No, go ahead, Judith. You give your explanation. Your,
No, I didn't hear what you said.
We didn't
We
hear
didn't
it.
hear
we
it.
but we
hear
didn't
what
hear
you
your
said.
explanation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So he, in this, it's may no one so much as taste your fruit again. Did you hear my explanation of the red, pink, gray,
No.
and black?
No,
Oh, sorry. Okay. So these are people who have studied Jesus extensively. The pink is, I would include this item unequivocally in the database for determining who Jesus was. In pink, I would include this item with reservations or modifications. In gray, I would not include this item in the database, but I might make use of some of the content in determining who Jesus was. And in black, I would not include this item in the primary database. And there's a second option that's pretty similar. Anyway, so in this, his only quote is, may no one so much as taste your fruit again. You want to guess what color it's in?
black.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So,
which is to suggest, Judith, that according to these scholars, that quote that that you just pointed out is likely not a original element of the gospel. Is that what the point that you're making?
it's not, there was no one there with a steno pad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But first continues the story. Did people see that?
Yeah. Yes. I'm just about to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
First, can you answer my question about Q?
So the question again was, Helen?
Or is Q included in one of the gospels, or where is the writing of Q? I mean, well,
So Q is a it's a source that they think exists, but they've never found it. And the reason they think it exists is because of the way that they have studied the other synoptics, the way that they've hypothesized the way Matthew and Luke lean on Mark. But there's something, they think that those other two gospels are leaning on something else besides Mark.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
so which would suggest that there are elements of Q in all of the synoptics, but they don't know, they've never actually seen Q itself.
Thank you.
Did you, Mark, did you do a slide of that? Because they have a slide in Brown's book on the existence of Q, and they have tables that show material that's
Right.
usually allotted to Q.
Right.
And
I'd be very happy to send that along afterwards if you're interested, by all means. Okay. So let's see, let me share again. Welcome back, Vicky. I'm sorry that you lost internet.
Mhm.
Let me see here. Where's my shared screen? I think here it is. No. There it is. Okay. Nope, that wrong one. How do I stop share? Okay. Share screen. Whiteboard. Ay. I'm really having trouble here. Where'd my
It's at the bottom.
right? But I'm trying to find the actual slideshow. Nope, that's not it. Sorry about this, folks. Oh gosh. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Is that going to be it? Tell me this is it. Yes, this is it. Okay, great.
Sandwich.
Yes, the sandwich. Okay, so here's so this is so once we look at the larger context for this passage that we're looking at, things start to become clear. And there's this technique of which this is perhaps the most famous example, which is called an intercalation. Bible scholars call it an intercalation. I don't know where that word comes from, but they also call it a sandwich, and you'll see why they call it a sandwich. So the passage that we just read together is at the beginning of this longer passage. So up until the end of that first paragraph here, this is the passage that we've just read, the passage about finding the tree and finding it that was not in season and cursing the tree. And then immediately after this cursing of the tree takes place, they find themselves in Jerusalem. And and I'll start reading from this passage here. They enter the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching, saying, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because of the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and the disciples went out of the city. So this is a familiar story, the story of Jesus turning over the tables in the temple. And then immediately after that, in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away at its roots.
Oh.
Then Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. Jesus answered them, have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and if you do not doubt it in your heart, but believe that what you will say will come to pass, it will be done for you. So I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father in heaven may also forgive you for your trespasses. Okay.
Version are you reading from, Mark?
That version is the New Revised Standard Version. Sorry?
Different, very different.
What
Meaning is different, but it's very different.
what version are you looking at, Dottie?
But not the, just
Not
re-
the new.
Yes, okay. So the Revised Standard. Okay.
So they revised it all again.
Yes,
oh, many times.
yes.
Many times.
So let me just unshare this screen here again.
So he actually adds a story in a story, kind of interrupts himself.
Right, correct. So there's a story within a story, right? Or if you think of it like the way they talk about a sandwich, the story begins here, there's a little story in between, and then the story ends afterwards, right? And so why do you think such a technique would be used?
Call from.
Any thoughts as to why would that technique be used?
Well, Mark, I have an idea, even though you can't see me.
Okay, please.
It makes it more poignant. I mean, there's this little kind of hanging thread about him saying this very odd thing to a fig tree.
Yeah.
And then you move away from it and you come back. It's it sort of wraps up the thought.
Right.
Solves a mystery. It solves a little mystery right there.
Yeah. So certainly, like in terms of narrative technique, it's an interesting technique because it builds a little bit of tension. It builds a little bit so yes, absolutely. What are some other possibilities for why this? Yes, Lori.
One thought I had is a lot of times the best way you learn is you're introduced to a thought and then later on you see it in action. So, for the sake of the disciples that he's trying to teach, he did a puzzling thing and then came back and then they picked up what happened before and then he was able to carry and explain deeper and further.
Right.
Yeah.
That's also interesting. So in other words, it becomes the second part kind of makes it more of a teachable moment, right? Kind of brings in a meaning that wasn't previously there when he talks about the power of prayer, essentially.
Why do they sandwich in the story of turning over the tables in the temple, calling them robbers? Why is that even in there?
Right. Thank you, Helen. That's really what I'm hoping to get at right there. So like, what is the significance of sandwiching that particular story within the two events of the fig tree?
I have no idea.
Could Mark read and write? Did he actually write? Mark, Mark, the gospel writer, did he actually write the Gospels? Gospel of Mark.
Well, Yeah, that's a complex question, but I do think that there is, you know, there is there was likely a individual who put this together in this way. So but when you say right, it has to be taken with a grain of salt, right? Because to write, for us, writing is a different thing than for them. You know, for them, it was totally okay for them to lean on something that already existed. Like, it would be okay, like it would be as if it would be okay for me to like write a Robert Frost poem and then put a stanza on the end and say it was by Mark Koyama. Like, that would be okay with them, but it's not okay for us, right? So writing is understood.
So my interpretation of Mark through this is the sandwich. He wants you, his story is the two slices of bread coming together.
Yeah.
And he wants you to challenge your mind and get through the ham and cheese first. And then
Yeah.
Digest it all.
I just think this was told orally. And somebody wanted to include this story about the temple. And so he just stuck it in there.
Okay, well, that's,
I think you can spend hours figuring out why it's there. But I think he just put it there because he wanted to tell that story. And that's a good place to say it.
what,
He's getting
what- okay. I think the ham and cheese thing, like what is the nature of the ham and cheese is important. But Vicky, what did you have to say?
Well, I've read a lot of John Dominic Crossan, and he talks a lot about sandwiching. And I don't fully understand why it was used in the Bible, but anyway, one of the things I read that he wrote about this story was that Jesus enters God's house and finds lots of action, but no righteousness. And that equals out to the tree has leaves, but no fruit. So and in a way, I'm also thinking that Jesus acts against, in divine judgment against these two signs, these two acts. The future act of cursing the temple and using a metaphor for cursing the tree, maybe having a more simple story for the disciples to understand, instead of what he's trying to say about what's going on in the temple, and then bringing it back to the temple.
Right. Yes, very much so. I'll be right with you, Deb. So, so if you place two things next to each other that are completely unrelated, this is kind of the note, like the idea of adjacency, right? If you place if you take let me see, if you take an iPhone and you place it next to a little sculpture of a Chinese saint, and you just place them right next to each other, and they're completely unrelated, but you place them next to each other, then by placing them next to each other, you create a relationship between them, and one of them, the interpretation of one of them influences the understanding of the other just by placing them next to each other. In this case, we have, you know, maybe two Chinese saints with an iPhone in the middle, right? So so we have a sandwich here where you just because they're sandwiched in that way, they influence the meaning of each other, right? So which is what Tina was saying about the ham and cheese. Like the ham and cheese is the part of the sandwich that you are really looking forward to, but the bread is important too. So what is the nature of the bread and cheese here, and what is the nature of the bread? I'm sorry, what is the nature of the ham and cheese and what is the nature of the bread? Because in this story, the fig tree is the bread, and the turning over of the tables in the temple is the ham and cheese. As it turns out, in the Old Testament, and I'm going to share screen again. Hopefully I can find it this time without difficulty. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to say something, Deb.
What I was gonna, it was kind of related to what Vicky said, that one of the things I learned was that the fig tree has long been a symbol for Israel and its relationship with God.
Yes.
And that's not something I had known before. So
Mhm.
when you, and obviously the temple is a very visible symbol for it's a very literal symbol for God in Jerusalem, and the fig tree is kind of this metaphor for God. So putting those two stories together, the fig tree looked like it was supposed to be, full of fruit, but it was barren.
Right.
The temple is supposed to be a place to worship God, but it seemed to be filled with trappings of everything that wasn't to do with God.
Right.
So both of them got destroyed.
Exactly. And can
Mm.
you guys see this share screen that I've put up?
Mark,
Yes, Vicky.
Mark, I have to leave, and I'm sorry to go to PT, but so there was something that I read that I
Okay.
wanted to share as far as the pastoral meaning of this verse, and I just
Oh.
thought I'd read it real quick.
Please.
It was, Jesus nourishes and protects. He prunes off the dead parts of our lives that won't serve us.
Hmm.
He wants us to stay deeply rooted in his word.
Okay. Thank you, Vicky. I'm sorry that you have to leave.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you all.
Is this
Thank
a
you,
bad time
Vicky.
for this to be happening, or?
Yes, it's just something that came up with my back, and this is when they could see me, so.
Oh, I see. Okay. All
I'll
right.
watch the recording to see what the rest of you have to say after. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Vicky.
Take care, Vicky.
I'm
Hi,
sorry.
Vicky.
Bye-bye, Vicky. Okay, so can you guys see this screen share? Okay, so
Textuality.
as it turns out, Jesus, seems to have a pretty good understanding and education with previous parts of the Bible. So this comes from the book of Jeremiah. The 8th chapter of Jeremiah. And if you'll see, this is a kind of Jeremiah's kind of indictment of the religious establishment in Israel. So this is just exactly what Deb was talking about earlier. And here Jeremiah says Jeremiah is kind of complaining about the religious establishment in Israel, and he says, they have treated the wound of my people carelessly, saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. They acted shamefully, they committed abomination, yet they were not at all ashamed. They did not know how to blush. Therefore they shall fall among those who fall. At the time when I punish them, they shall be overthrown, says the Lord. When I wanted to gather them, says the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from them. So the fig tree is a well-known symbol that kind of speaks to the relationship with Israel and God. And this idea of there being a fig tree with no figs on it has kind of a symbolic resonance from the earlier part of the Bible that is suggestive that the children of Israel have not been kind of fully doing their part in terms of their religious observance. And that is exactly what happens in the middle, in the ham and cheese, right, of this story. That's exactly what the problem is with the money changers in the temple. So you take this symbol of the fig tree that has this symbolic resonance from earlier parts of the Bible, and you put it at the beginning, and then you have the story of the temple, and then you have the fig tree at the end. So we have this situation here where the meaning in the middle is defined by the two pieces of bread on the side. Does that make any sense?
No. Yes,
Well,
it makes sense, but you have to really work at it.
Well,
You know what I mean?
those biblical scholars really work at it.
I know, they really work at it.
Lori.
I have a potential humorous interpretation. Maybe whenever we think of Jesus overturning the tables, it's because he's hungry.
Where are those darn figs? Maybe they're under the table.
Grumpy Jesus.
Grumpy Jesus.
What they call it, hangry, right? Like hungry and angry.
Angry?
Yeah.
But
I
in
just-
the end, he's only going to get the bread.
Yeah.
I
I
just figure out,
I guess they can't hear me.
didn't we have the same kind of story when Jesus was 12? Overturning the tables, and the parents came back. They all left and he stayed back, and when they found him, he was in the temple.
They found him
Yeah.
at the table, but he was teaching. I don't think he was turning
Oh,
over.
He was teaching.
Oh.
People who are opposed to gambling, they point to this verse
Mhm.
about overturning the tables and that they are robbers. I've heard that quoted.
Mhm. Interesting.
Baptist.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely Baptist.
But so I guess Dottie, I would offer that perhaps this interpretation that may seem kind of like meandering and circuitous to you, it may at least offer some
Yes.
some understanding of why this rather arbitrary and kind of mean-hearted thing happens in the middle of this text, right? Like it's, when you read this text on the surface, you think, well, what is wrong with Jesus? Why is he doing this mean-hearted thing in the middle of this text? And what did that fig tree ever do to him? You know, kind of thing. And this interpretation at least gives us some kind of deeper cultural understanding of why that element might be included in the text. Yes, Deb.
The other thing that occurred to me is that if you go back to verse 11 in the story, before this one starts, he goes to Jerusalem first.
Yeah.
And he goes into the temple and looks around, and then he and his disciples go back to Bethany. So it makes me wonder whether when he saw the fig tree, I mean, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, why didn't he overturn the tables when he was in the temple the first time? He went into the temple, looked around, went back to Bethany. Then the next day, there's like this object lesson with the fig tree. And then he goes to Jerusalem and overturns the table. You know, it's almost like a sandwich within a sandwich within a sandwich. But you know, it's like it didn't. I didn't catch that part before. I just happened I just happened to glance down at my Bible while we were talking and listening, and it said he went to Jerusalem ahead of time, verse 11, and went back to Bethany, and then goes out on the road and does the whole fig tree thing on his way back to the temple. So it's almost like it was, I'm going to use this as a teaching moment in another way.
It's like a club sandwich rather than a sandwich.
Yeah.
But I had never connected that part of that being in the temple the night before or the day before to the temple turn over the tables the next day. So,
Oh.
any
Yeah.
rate.
Rich.
Oh, thank you. You know, this is fascinating, and I don't know if you, Reverend Mark, or anybody else has any other examples of verses in the Bible that use this sandwich theory or technique, I guess, for lack of a better word. There has to be others, because it just opens up a whole new way of interpretation.
I think, you know, probably be it would be an easy search to look at that using that word intercalation. And one of the things that occurs to me, like when I was doing this research and I found this, it occurs to me that this is a technique that I use almost every Sunday, right?
Yes.
And I didn't know there was a name for it in this way, but like I usually tell a bit of a story and then talk about the gospel and then finish off the story.
Right.
And I had no idea that I was using a well trusted Jesus technique in this way. So thank you for everyone for bringing that to my attention.
Mark does it a lot, because I remember hearing a lot of that's when I said earlier that I relearned something I had forgotten. I remember hearing a lot of Mark sermons where I think a lot of Mark is a story, then another, there's a lot of sandwiches. I think there's one, I don't know, I just remember that being preached on a lot over the years.
Yeah.
But I can't think of an example right now.
Well, I'm trying to
I
think.
will never look at a club sandwich the same way again.
Indeed. Yeah. Someone was about to say something I didn't hear. No?
Well, I was going to tell you before we could see the rest of your cat, I was going to say you're growing a tail.
Yeah. Yeah.
All I could see was the tail.
Yeah. Cats are much more a part of our professional life now than they used to be.
Oh, yeah.
He usually shows up whenever I'm on Zoom for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe he senses that something is going on and he wants to be a part of it.
I just wanted to say the commentary that I wanted to read, we've all done a really good job of pulling apart this whole thing, because there's nothing else in the commentary that we didn't already do.
All right.
Yay for us.
Yay for us. Excellent. Excellent. Well, you know, I don't want to be too scholarly about this necessarily, but it is really interesting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yes.
super
It is.
interesting. Yeah.
To see how it folds in together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that every verse, and this verse is kind of a peculiar one, right? And that's perhaps why we're looking at it. But every verse has within it kind of this potential, not only for us to talk about it in kind of a scholarly way in terms of like the Bible, but every verse also has the potential of being able to give us ideas of what it means to be in relationship with God, and also what it may possibly mean in terms of pastorally, like caring for each other. And there are sources, there are biblical commentaries that intentionally will lift up you know, the theological perspective and the pastoral perspective. And so, you know, I don't want to neglect those things. Like the first two Bible studies that we've done so far have seemed to be kind of a little bit on the scholarly side, but I don't want to neglect those other important elements as well. So if you ever feel like, you know, you want to bring up something else that hasn't been talked about, I'm happy to go there.
I think Vicky brought part of that up
Yeah.
with what her thing that in kind of like, it's not just your outward appearance that counts, it's what's inside and what you're, you know, Jesus got rid of something that didn't have any purpose to producing good moral behavior.
Hmm.
And so, you know, cursing the fig tree, you're getting rid of an unproductive tree that isn't producing good fruit.
Hmm.
So I think that might be the, you know, getting rid of the money changers is getting rid of things that have no place, and, you know, getting rid of the hypocrisy and the stuff that has no. I mean, it's kind of like all these people who go around telling us how wonderful, you know, what wonderful Christians they are, but when they're just on the outside, they're not on the inside.
Right. Yeah, and that it's really interesting to think about. I think it's really interesting to think about what elements of our lives we may be holding on to that we'd be better off, in which the roots would wither. You're like, what are those?
Totally.
What are those parts of our lives that are like that? Because there probably are things that we could do with uprooting and letting go of. So that's certainly something to think about, to go away and think about with this verse. I'll have to think about that for myself.
Especially this time of Lent, cleaning out,
Yeah.
and letting go, and the whole 9 yards. This is a lesson for us all.
Totally. Yes. Helen, you were about to say something?
We've had a year to reflect. This has been the most reflective year, I think, of my life.
Yeah.
This is
Very
like
much so.
solitary time that you're thinking about all different aspects, things that I've done, and how can it change, and very reflective.
Yes.
That, you know, when the fig tree withered, it illustrated the power of Jesus.
Mm.
And when he turned over the tables and called the robbers in the temple, he was illustrating the power that he had.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's my comment.
Nice. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I myself am happy to stay on longer. Generally speaking, an hour is oftentimes what we allocate.
Yeah,
for this kind of thing. But if anybody wants to stay on, that's fine. But also, I want to be respectful of people's time. So,
Yeah. I appreciated your Sunday service, your sermon very much.
Oh,
Really spoke to me.
thank you. I'm trying to remember which one it was. No.
Members only.
Oh, members only. Right. Thank you.
Through the open door. You know, all the, yes, there was a lot. In that sermon.
Thank you.
Fernando's Hideaway.
Hernando's.
I need to sign off.
Okay,
So,
thank you, Liz. Thank
everybody.
you for coming.
Hi, Liz.
Bye, Liz.
I do too. Thank you, everyone.
And I'm going to be on my way.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. God bless everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Oh, Mark,
Yeah,
don't forget to send the 2 names and addresses.
Yeah,
for
I'm trying-
checks.
they haven't, he hasn't replied to me, but as soon as he does, I'll. let you-
That's fine. I hadn't gotten anything. It's just a reminder.
Okay.
Thanks.
Does anybody know if Bob Dunn has moved, or is he still in Jaffrey?
He's moved.
He has moved.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping they followed the mail.
Okay,
Recognition can we give to Bob? Dear Bob.
yeah,
He was ever faithful, and he was a wonderful steward in our church.
absolutely.
Yes,